Pokémon Unite, the game that taught me that yes, in fact, I do have gamer rage. Pokémon Unite has been out for a year now, but because of everything that's happened, it feels like much longer. So let's take a look back at the first year of the game's life. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Pokémon Unite is a free-to-play MOBA where you control one Pokémon on a team of 5. Two teams square off by scoring in each other's goals with points gained from knocking out wild Pokémon and opposing players. All the while, you're gaining experience to increase your stats and evolve your Pokémon. It's basically baby's first League of Legends, and I love it. I want to say a huge thank you to Spraggles for helping me with this video. Spraggles makes great Pokémon Unite content, so if you want to follow more of the game, you should totally check them out. To start things off, let's go all the way back to the announcement. In June of 2020, the Pokémon Company had their own Pokémon Presents to show off a brand new game. Fans were hyped. Would it be Let's Go Johto? The Diamond and Pearl remakes? Gen 9? Maybe even Pokémon TFT? Nope. We got Pokémon Unite, something that nobody saw coming. Shortly after, the announcement became the most disliked video on the Pokémon Company's YouTube channel. Were people just upset that they weren't getting what they wanted, or did this game look especially bad? Well, all I can tell you is that I didn't think it looked too promising.
Okay, it's a mobile game. Woo.
Seeing Pokemon wear clothes always gives me the heebie-jeebies. Maybe if their clothes looked cooler. Speaking of cool things, here's a picture of me from college where I look like Sasquatch. On an unrelated note, the sponsor of today's video is Dr. Squatch. Here's something you might not know about me. I run extremely warm. One downside to that is I get sweaty more often than the average wolf. So I need to shower more often than the average wolf. And that's where Dr. Squatch comes in. Dr. Squatch has a full collection of products that smell amazing and are at least 98% natural in origin. As someone who, as I mentioned, showers a lot, I've been really impressed with Dr. Squatch. I especially like the Birchwood Breeze Bar. The scent has this crisp, woodsy feeling, which I really like, and the texture is nice and gritty. New customers can get 20% off on orders of $20 or more. Use my code DSQWolfey and click the link in the description below. Thanks again to Dr. Squatch for sponsoring today's video. Once the game came out, I decided to give it a shot, and I was pleasantly surprised. It was simple, quick, and addictive. Whereas League of Legends was easy to get lost in and could take up to 45 minutes for one match, Pokémon Unite had a small map, a limited number of Pokémon and items, and matches had a set time limit of 10 minutes. This isn't a negative about Unite at all. On the contrary, the short match time made the game easy to pick up and play for just a little bit at a time. Unite had a good variety of Pokémon to choose from and enough customization to experiment with. It really made you want to keep playing to find the best build for your favorite Mon. On release, Unite had 19 Pokemon you could play as. Some of them included their pre-evolutions and some didn't, possibly for balancing reasons. Which is strange because the game was nowhere near balanced. Gengar, for example, was notorious for being horribly overpowered at launch. Using the move Hex, Gengar could take out an entire team if you let it level up too fast. Hex allows Gengar to teleport and become invincible while it does so. If that doesn't sound scary enough, Hex gets a shorter cooldown if the target has a status condition. What move can give a target a status condition? Sludge Bomb, which Gengar also has. All you need to do is throw a Sludge Bomb at your target, then go to town with Hex. The target would only be able to get 1 or 2 hits in because Gengar was invincible between teleportation. 2 weeks later, Hex got nerfed with a significant reduction in damage, but it wasn't enough. 4 months later, they nerfed Sludge Bomb and Hex, making Gengar practically unusable in some players' eyes. Lucaria's move Extreme Speed worked similarly to Hex, allowing it to jump in and out of battle or turn opponents around in 1v1s. Just like Hex, Extreme Speed has seen a number of nerfs over the last year. Lucario, who could once solo top lane, fell from greatness, becoming a measly bottom lane attacker with the rest of the balanced Pokemon. But balancing issues were not the most controversial thing about Unite. A week after the game dropped, a video by Moist Critical went viral, where he suggested that Pokémon Unite was pay to win.
The most powerful Pokemon will be the legendary mom's credit card.
Critical spent $100 in Eos Gems, one of the, 50 currencies in this game, to purchase item enhancers, something you usually had to grind quite a bit for. This allowed him to level up his held items to the point where he could output up to 1,000 damage at level 6. The game had only been out for a week, so the odds of your opponents having high-leveled held items were very low. Critical had all 3 of his held items at or near max level, was using extremely powerful Pokemon, and is just good at video games to begin with. The dude was a freight train. Now, while this may have been the case at the time, things are much different today. Over the past year, it's become much easier to raise your held items to their max levels. Item enhancers and AOS tickets, which you can use to buy item enhancers, are regularly given out as rewards for completing challenges, using the energy lottery machine thing, and leveling up your battle pass, premium pass, and trainer. The game will also occasionally give you coupons that will allow you to have an item at its max level for a certain number of days. All the while, you'll be racking up the currency and rewards to get that item to max level before your time expires. Obviously, players that are just getting into the game don't start with these benefits, but if you give the game a week, I'm sure you could get at least one held item to its max level. Furthermore, I know plenty of people who are just getting into Unite now and have done fine without leveling their items. You're on a team with 4 other players who, more than likely, already have their items leveled up. You could definitely spend real money to buy item enhancers and catch up to them as soon as you start playing, but you still need to know how to play the game. Just because your stats have been buffed doesn't mean you're better than everyone else. When Critical made his video, most people were still learning the game and didn't have high-leveled items. It's no surprise he wiped the floor with them. By now, your opponents likely have experience and high-leveled items, so it's crucial that you... What was that? Oh, right, sorry. It's critical that you learn the game before you decide it's worth it to spend real money on it, or whether you want to grind it for a few weeks first. I promise you, if you know what you're doing, you'll have fun with it without spending a cent. There were, of course, people that fell off because they felt they weren't good and blamed the items, but whether this was because they actually weren't good, I can't say for sure. They could have spent money to level their items up and still lost every game. So yes, Unite might have been pay to win for people who were just naturally good at MOBAs at first, but it also might have been pay to lose for noobs like me. With most of the player base having experience and leveled up items, paying is more so about skipping the grind. While I do find this sort of annoying, it's not a deal breaker for me, and frankly, it's only really relevant when you're first starting out. Now, if the game was absolutely, inarguably, without a doubt unplayable, unless you had max level held items, then we'd have a problem. What really bothers me about all of this is not knowing where to invest your item enhancers once you get them. After unlocking several items and getting them to level 30, I realized I wasted a ton of my resources leveling up the wrong item for the most optimal build. It was a few days before I was able to gain back the item enhancers to level the one I needed. This pretty much forces players to find the best builds online first, instead of experimenting with what works best for them, which is pretty dumb for a game that didn't even have a concrete meta for a while. I, for one, wasn't going to spend a nickel, not even on clothes. Although, I will admit that going into battles where everyone else was wearing something felt like I forgot to wear pants to school. Again. Speaking of which, why do some of these Pokemon get shirts but not pants? Something's fishy about this. Now, normally at this point in the video, I pause and tell you how few of my viewers are actually subscribed, and ask you nicely if you would consider subscribing. Today, though, I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm just going to beg, please, 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 please subscribe, please, 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 please. Back to the video. I will admit, Pokémon Unite has a serious microtransaction problem. Technically, everything in the game is purchasable. Instead of getting everything for a fixed price like most video games, the live service style game makes you pay for every individual item, with the other option usually being grinding. However, Unite has items that are only available to purchase with real-world money. In October, the new Alolan Ninetales Hollowware, or skin as they're referred to in literally every other game, made headlines for costing players $40 in gems. You can buy a whole other game for that price. Hollowware doesn't do anything or give you any kind of advantage in battle, it just looks nice. This is honestly ridiculous and feels a little suspect, especially for a game meant for kids. Also, the energy tanks are a pretty bad look too. After every battle, you earn energy to fill a tank that will dispense a random item. Sound familiar? Some Hollowware is also locked behind this, giving you incentive to purchase tanks in hopes of receiving the one you want, despite their low drop rate. I'm not sure how much of a problem this is, as I've never had anything to chase in the energy tank, but I'm sure there are people who do. Nevertheless, it seems like the general public wasn't too perturbed by this controversy, because within a month, the game had reached nearly 10 million downloads. To compare, Sword and Shield have only sold 24.5 million units, and those games have been out for almost 3 years. As of this April, Unite has been downloaded over 70 million times. Of course, the game is free, but still, 70 million people have downloaded this game. Well, 70 million devices, I should specify. I'm sure there's a couple million in there who downloaded the game on every device they own. I, for one, made sure to download it on both of my Samsung smart refrigerators. Please sponsor me, Samsung Smart Refrigerator Company. Please, 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 please. With so many people playing the game, more problems began to arise. Zapdos, for instance, was a big grievance for casual and hardcore gamers alike. Knocking out Zapdos grants your team various opportunities. Not only can you instantly score in each of your opponent's goals, but your points are doubled because you're in the last 2 minutes of the game. This is why you'll occasionally see a player ignoring Zapdos to score instead. Please don't do this unless you absolutely know you're going to win. There's so many horror stories of a team dominating an entire match and then losing it because the other team knocked out Zapdos. Catching it pretty much wins you the game because of how many points it's worth. It's certainly possible to lose after knocking out Zapdos, but that would have to mean that you were either in a huge point deficit or that the other team just had crazy good defense. I don't mind losing the game by missing Zapdos if we at least gave it our all, but as I mentioned, you'll often have teammates completely ignoring it. This is where the matchmaking criticisms come to light. There's always one person on your team who loads up a match and then walks away, only to come back halfway through or get replaced with a CPU. Pak. Donkey. This is unbelievably frustrating, especially if you're playing on your own. I understand getting distracted every now and then, but how does this happen in every match? Even when you're just queuing up a game, there's someone who doesn't confirm. I know it sounds ridiculous, but losing one teammate is pretty much a game over. With such a big player base, also comes a variety of skill. One would think that an AI in 2022 would be smart enough to put together 5 people of similar skill, right? And have them battle against teams of similar skill too? Well, I guess we're just not there yet. The online ladder moves you up or down depending on whether you win or lose. It doesn't account for each player's personal performance. With online multiplayer, there will inevitably be players who get carried or carry someone else, bringing someone into a rank they might not belong in. Once you reach the top rank, it isn't possible to demote as well, meaning at the top more than anywhere else on the ladder, there can be enormous skill differences. I'm not sure if there is an easy solution for this, aside from make a better matchmaking system, but the workaround most players use is to only play with friends. Another problem with matchmaking is the general lack of communication between teammates. You get a few phrases during prep time, but they're only on screen for a few seconds, and they're easy to miss. It's very common that I'll call a lane and then a bunch of people call the same lane right after. Thankfully, right before the first anniversary, we got an update that would make sure all teammates saw who picked what. Not only does this ensure everyone saw which lane you picked, but players were more encouraged to even pick a lane, which didn't always happen. Nothing's more nerve-wracking than that split-second decision you get as soon as you leave the gate and nobody's called a lane. You'd often find yourself going down a lane with 3 or 4 other teammates and playing chicken for whoever had to double back and miss out on that sweet, sweet experience. You also have phrases you can use in battle, so when this sort of thing happens, you'll often see someone spamming, "Retreat! Retreat!" This is especially funny when someone on your team is attempting to steal someone else's jungle. Now let's talk about meta. For a while there, Pokémon Unite didn't really have a clear meta. We were all kind of just running around like idiots with our heads on fire. Once people caught on to the best builds and lane pairings, competitive Unite really began to take off. The very core of the meta today is a race to gain experience points. Experience is extremely valuable in Unite, because leveling up before your opponent gives you the upper hand in every battle. The jungle lane provides you with the most experience and even a few buffs. This is why you'll typically see a single speedster or attacker in the jungle. When I competed in Alpharad's tournament, I used Greedent to bypass my own jungle experience and steal the other sides before they could claim it. The other competitors were completely caught off guard and struggled to keep their lanes in check as they came to aid the jungler. While it did work well for me in the tournament, it might be because it involved 2 teams that were all on comms. Plus, in the end, we ended up losing to a team that we already faced because they knew it was coming. The best practice for junglers is to quickly knock out all of your own wild Pokemon and then pop up in the other lanes to aid with huge team fights. You especially want to be ready to take on Dreadnought, which will earn you a huge chunk of experience and a temporary shield. Rotom also appears at the same time, which is useful in scoring points, but knocking out Dreadnought is more important because of how vital experience is. Of course, if you hop on the ladder, you'll start to realize that most players don't even know there's a meta. No rotating, no communicating, just winging it. Half the time, your jungler won't even come out to help with team fights, let alone to knock out Dreadnought. Sometimes they just abandon the jungle altogether. Whenever I see this, I just pray that we can knock out Zapdos before the other team. Losing a game that you've been winning the entire time because of Zapdos feels awful, but stealing a win when your teammates aren't pulling their weight feels amazing. Pokemon Unite has continued adding new characters regularly. When this happens, a meta that gets disrupted by a new character usually solidifies within a week or two. What makes Unite's meta different is the constant balance patches. The Pokemon in Unite are nerfed and buffed so often that it can be difficult to keep up with. It's not unusual to log on and be hit with a long list of changes made to a number of Pokemon. Sometimes the list will even include Pokemon you've been doing well with. In many cases though, you'll see it coming. The issue with MOBAs is they'll introduce new characters that are extremely powerful, so you're more likely to spend money on them. Then after a few weeks, they'll get nerfed. Unite is no exception to this. When Blastoise was introduced, for example, it was practically unstoppable. It got nerfed a few weeks later after millions of people had already spent money to get it. I hate this and it's stupid. Fortunately, Unite doesn't really do this anymore. Maybe because there's over 30 Pokemon now, or maybe they heard that we all hated it and thought it was stupid. Absol, who's been criticized for being overpowered since launch, just got nerfed this past July. It took a whole year for the developers to realize this thing was OP. We all already knew. If you ask me, I think they were just being stubborn. Which Pokemon do you think is overpowered in Unite? Let me know in the comments. Just know that your comments might be outdated by the time it gets published because there's a patch every 3 seconds. Update! While writing the script, Tyranitar was released, and you guessed it, it is way too powerful. I'm sure it'll be nerfed by the time this video gets released. From October to January, we had to suffer with Sylveon, Greedent, Dekidui, Sarina, Dragonite, and Trevenant all being released and then nerfed within a few weeks. Sylveon was so strong, they nerfed it within 48 hours. By late January, we got a huge balance patch that nerfed the Pokemon causing the biggest issues, and buffed those that were beginning to fall by the wayside. The Pokemon Company then announced the beginning of the official Championship Series tournament, and the high-ranking players knew that they had to do something about this chaos meta if they were going to compete. Finally, a real tournament-ready meta was beginning to take shape. And then we got Hoopa. With its ability to teleport team members all around the map, Hoopa literally flipped the metagame on its head. A month after its release, it was used on every single team in the North American Champion Series tournament. The tournament in Japan, however, only saw Hoopa on 39% of teams. This is because the Eastern meta focused more on scoring as many points as possible as fast as they could. Hoopa's main purpose is mobilizing the entire team into a team fight, which was more of a Western idea. Our meta was basically a hodgepodge of the Eastern score comp strategy with team fights sprinkled in. However, once Hoopa was released, we got a step closer to the meta we know today, one that involves a ton of fighting and barely any scoring. What really put the nail in the coffin was the nerfing of Buddy Barrier and Score Shield, two items keeping the score comp meta alive. Once they got nerfed, it was all about team fights. Good luck trying to decipher what's going on here. Games that used to end with teams scoring around 1,000 points now ended with scores around 500. Constant rebalancing, an unstable meta, and bad matchmaking. This was the life of a competitive Unite player. For some, having a meta that's always in flux is what makes Unite great. I know with the mainline games, I can get tired of a meta real quickly, but one that's constantly being shaken up can be stimulating. Dominating with a new Pokemon or technique feels super rewarding. Sadly, there's always the chance that a Pokemon or item could be nerfed, sending it back to square one. I went through this exact roller coaster of emotions after Greedent was nerfed, probably because of what I did in Alfred's tournament.
There's all 5 on me, but I'm making it.
They're so mad.
It's a robbery.
Right now, Unite's meta centers around Hoopa and Blissey. Other dominant Pokemon include Dragonite, Sarina, Machamp, and Lucario. If you watched the World Championships this year, you might have noticed that most teams included a Hoopa, Blissey, and one or more of these other Pokemon. And what's wild is that next year, the Pokemon you see at Worlds could be completely different. While making this video, Unite has already introduced 6 new characters and a new system to raise your stats in battle. Now you can collect and equip emblems that each have their own benefit and drawback. Combining these is another way to min-max your Pokemon to truly make it excel in what it's good at. I'm not sure how I feel about it just yet, because while I do enjoy experimenting with them, there's so many. Right now, there's one for almost every Gen 1 Pokemon, and they all come in Bronze, Silver, and Gold, and have another color they each correspond with. It's a little overwhelming, but I'm sure once a new meta forms around it, it will be a lot easier to manage. You can also just use the recommended loadouts if you don't want to deal with it. Just remember to pay attention to which stat you're boosting. So when all is said and done, was Pokemon Unite a success? It had millions of downloads, an exciting, successful competitive circuit culminating with the World Championships, and an active player base of casual and competitive players alike. So I'd say it's doing pretty okay. I can't wait to see what year 2 has in store for Pokemon Unite.